Hello, everybody. Welcome to my home studio for an impromptu and relaxed chat with my friend and bass player Mark Egan, who's currently with us. I believe he's in Connecticut at the moment. Mark's one of the best bass players I know, and I'm really chuffed to have him involved here. So we're going to say hello, Mark. How are you doing there? Nice to see you.
Hey,
You know,
Paul. Hey, everybody. Nice to see you.
yeah. So, Mark, you and I have been kind of jamming together and gigging together around the US off and on about a couple of years ago. And it was fascinating to have you in the band. I think you're a wonderful player, and your ear, your musicality, your technique, your knowledge, and your experience is extraordinary. So I'm just pleased that you're here, and maybe you could tell us about where you're from in the US, how you started, how old were you when you started playing, and what were you listening to, and what bands were you joining, and etc.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in near Boston, Massachusetts, a town called Brockton,
Right,
and I went. Yeah, I started out in the schools when I was little, in the fourth grade. Actually, third grade, I started playing a little guitar,
right,
and then in the fourth grade, I started playing trumpet and played in the bands in elementary school, junior high school, and I was active in playing professionally as a trumpet player. Actually, when I was
right.
15 years old, playing in bands around Boston area, playing mostly in rhythm and blues bands,
Yeah,
playing the music of Wilson Pickett, James Brown, Sam and Dave, in the horn section,
yeah,
playing.
yes.
At the same time, I started playing bass when I was 15, and just because I enjoyed listening to bass, and I started with a really good guitar teacher named Mike Lally, who was from Brockton,
Right.
and that was the inception of learning bass at that time.
So were you kind of like into jazz from the beginning, or was it did you work towards jazz? Was like rock and blues, Cream and Hendrix, that kind of thing was important for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it was all, yes. The music of the day was, I'm a baby boomer, so this was the early 60s when I started playing. So I was listening to the music on the radio, Cream, Hendrix, the
Yeah,
Beatles, a
yeah,
lot of Motown music. But at the same time, I was studying trumpet and playing in jazz bands in high school.
right.
So I was playing jazz. And like for me, at that time, jazz, I was very much into Chet Baker, great
Oh,
trumpet player. I
amazing.
hadn't really got into Miles at that point, but I was listening to Maynard Ferguson's band, big band, playing in a big band, and then playing R&B, but also listening to rock and listening, like I said, Hendrix and
Right.
Cream. And, listening, my ear was going for the bass because when I listened to pop music, I was listening to Motown. For some reason, even though I was a bass player, I was really tuned in, even though I was a trumpet player, excuse me, I was
Yeah.
very tuned in to the bass line. So that's the reason I bought a bass. My first instrument was a Delray bass,
Right.
and I had a Supro bass amp with a 115, which I wish I still had. It's a
Yeah. Right.
great amp.
Yeah. Yeah.
It distorted like crazy, but it was all tubes, and it was good. But so that was the music. And I really got opened up to the real jazz mainstream when I went to the University of Miami to study music when I
Right.
graduated from high school.
Right.
And that's where I met the great educator, jazz educator, Jerry Coker and Whit Seidner. And I studied with them and I studied jazz. And when I first heard Miles Davis and the bands that were happening in the late 60s, this was around Bitches Brew in a Silent Way, it just expanded my mind and my whole
Right.
consciousness of music.
Yeah. Yeah. It does, doesn't it? It does.
Yeah,
You
then
know.
I started going backwards from that point. I realized that there was a whole evolution of jazz, not only jazz, but in rock, and going back to the roots and really trying to find, what the real innovators were and tried to copy them, literally, to, get inspired by them and transcribe things and play along with them. And
Yeah.
that's when I started to go back and follow the bass lineage because even though I was a trumpet player, I was going back in the trumpet lineage to Kenny Dorham and um, Freddie Hubbard and Lee Morgan and all the great trumpet players. But when I started to get into bass, I did the same thing. I went back
Mm-hmm.
to the acoustic players, to
Right.
Jimmy Blanton and Ray Brown, Oscar Pettiford. Then I started listening to Charles Mingus, and then he was the father of modern acoustic bass. And then I went forward from there, Ron Carter, and then I started listening to Bill Evans, and of course Eddie Gomez and Scott LaFaro, and Ron Carter and Dave Holland. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when I moved to New York, I took lessons with Dave Holland, which was very illuminating for me.
Wow, wow.
Something I always wanted.
So you went from Boston straight to Miami to that music school, and you were there with, like, correct me if I'm wrong, you were there with Pat Metheny, Jaco Pastorius, and Danny Gottlieb. Is that right? You were all there at the same time?
Yes, we were all there at the same time. Jaco wasn't a student there. Jaco lived in Fort Lauderdale area.
Right.
This was down in the Miami area where he was. So when I was there, it was Clifford Carter, the great keyboard player, Hiram Bullock,
right,
Danny Gottlieb, Pat Metheny, Steve Morse, Rod Morgenstern. The whole Dreg started out as a rock ensemble at the University of Miami.
Right.
So there were all these great players that are, trying to find themselves. And when you spoke of Jaco was in northern Miami. So one summer he did a bass workshop at the university, and that's when I met him and started studying with him.
Right. Right.
And so it was a real melting pot, not only with the students but the teachers. There were also some great players. Joe DiOrio, the great guitarist, was playing in a band with the great multi-instrumentalist Ira Sullivan. And I would go hear them at this club called the Rancher, and it was very enlightening and mind expanding to hear them because they were at such an advanced level.
Right.
And I actually got to play with Ira Sullivan a few years later, from when I first went down to Miami, as well as Joe DiOrio, Tony Castellano, and one of the best drummers in the world I've ever heard, Steve Bagby, who's no longer with us.
Right. Okay.
So very lucky to be able to go in Miami. I chose Miami because Jerry Coker was a teacher there, and I heard about him. Right. I got accepted at the University of Miami as a jazz major, as a trumpet major. And so I went down and, just got into it there.
I find it absolutely incredible, right, that you've gone down to Miami and like, you're a master player. There's no denying it. And you've got, like, Pat Metheny there at the same time, and and Jaco's on the scene, and I'm pronouncing Danny Gottlieb's name incorrectly. I apologize, And you're saying that Steve Mawson's there, and it's just extraordinary that caliber of talent all seem to descend. Unless there's talent like that everywhere, and it just so happened that you guys managed to get a chance to get out and get heard, and get touring and get playing. It's so I'm fascinated. You connected with Pat Metheny there. Were you jamming with him at the college there, or did you come into the Pat Metheny group after you'd split from Miami, or how did that come together, Mark?
I was there, I think, a year or two before Pat came.
Right.
And I was playing in the jazz band as a trumpet player, but then I switched over my major to bass, and within 1 year I was playing in the first jazz band, so I made a real modulation in my whole direction. I became a bass player. And I played with Pat in that band. And I'll never forget the first time I saw Pat. We were playing in the band, and I remember seeing Pat sitting in with the big band, and he was already completely formed as a professional player. He just sounded amazing. He had embraced Wes Montgomery, and he sounded like a cross between Wes Montgomery, Pat Martino, and Mick Goodrick. I'm not sure. He was really, really well put together when he first came.
Yeah.
And he only stayed a few years. I don't know exactly his history as far as how long he stayed. Then he moved up to teach at Berkeley in Boston.
Right.
But, I think the thing about the melting pot of Miami was that you have Miami's proximity to South America. There was a lot of Cuban music in Miami. There was a lot of South American music from all countries. And there was also a very fertile jazz scene there and rock scene. And I think the people that were responsible for that were Ira Sullivan and the people that I mentioned before. And
Right.
there was a lot of work. There were a lot of gigs. Miami Beach was thriving. Every hotel had a band, a big band that backed up acts that came every week. So it got to a point for me where I was playing in a band at a couple of the different hotels, and it really cut my teeth on professionally backing up singers and acts, because you had one day to rehearse when they arrived, and then you would do it for a whole week. So you had to get it together, and that's how I cut my teeth on sight reading and conceptually getting it together fast. And also, you could make a living even though I was going to school all day and working all night. It was a full schedule, but very unusual that there was that much work, and there were a lot of clubs around to play. I had mentioned that club, the Rancher.
Right.
And as time progressed, as I also mentioned, I played with Ira's group, which was a great honor, to play with Ira. I was playing acoustic bass in that band,
Right.
because I studied upright down in my. And Ira had another band with electric, and Jocko was in that band. And I remember meeting with Ira, and Ira saying, "Well, you got to hear this bass player Jocko. He's something, And he was playing a composition at Jocko's that he had then, and I started hearing about Jocko, and then they played with that band at a club in Fort Lauderdale called the Lion's Share. And I went to hear him, and that's when it totally blew my mind.
Right.
To see someone playing what he was playing, because he was a true innovator, and he was in the best form that I've ever seen him before he became really famous with Weather Report. I think that's some of my favorite Jocko. So there was a real melting pot. There was a very creative music scene, and for me, I've always pursued creative music and wanted to be around people that are making new music and creative music. And I enjoy playing classic music too, classic funk, classic jazz. But I also like the progressive music where people were really expanding the boundaries of improvisation. And it was down there. It was big time. Because also remember you had other bands like Drum McLaughlin Mahavishnu Orchestra just came out.
Right.
At that time at the Student Union, which is where they had bands play. Miles Davis would come down with the Bitches Brew Band with Dave Holland and Jack DeJohnette, Keith Jarrett, one week, and then the next week you'd see Charles Mingus, and then the next week you'd have Jefferson Airplane, and I'd tune in to Jack Cassidy and his bass playing, and he was an influence on me, as well as Jack Bruce. So it's a lot of opportunities, and it was very thriving. Very fertile soil down there for music.
It definitely, it isn't like that today, and I don't know, not wanting to get into that too much, but there's a part of me that thinks that the innovators that you're talking about there, Miles Davis and Jaco Pastorius and John McLaughlin and Pat Metheny is also, it's almost like now, it's kind of like all the meat's been ripped off the carcass, It's like there's great. I look at great players on YouTube and I hear great players on YouTube, but those days of it all being brand new, whether it be jazz or rock or pop or whatever, those days of it all being brand new seem to be kind of in the past. I wish I wasn't saying that. I wish I didn't believe that, but that's kind of how it feels, So so you're down there and you're working with these amazing players, and I mean Pat Metheny's, one of my top 5 all-time greats, without a shadow of a doubt. So did you move up to New York, or did you go to California from Miami? What was the evolution from Florida after that, Mark?
Well, I stayed down in Miami after I graduated in '74. I was there from '69 to '74, and I started playing with a group called the Phyllis Hyman Group.
Right.
It was called the PH Factory, and in that group was Hiram Bullock, Clifford Carter, Billy Bowker, who's a fantastic drummer. That before I became a drumming partner with Danny Gottlieb, Billy Bowker we were a team, big time team. We played with a group in Miami that was called Baker's Dozen, which was a big band that played with all the top players around. And I always grew when I was in a situation where everyone was better than me, which is usually the case. And I rose to the occasion. I like to be in those situations. I like the challenge, and I really learned a lot from that, being in that situation. Uh, so I stayed for a few years in Miami playing with Phyllis Hyman, and then we got a offer to come up and play in New York for a 1 or 2 week engagement at a club called Russ Brown's. It was up in the Upper West Side. And we drove up and we played, and we were so successful that the club asked us to stay on indefinitely. So
Right. Right.
it was an interesting situation because I had an apartment in New York, excuse me, in Miami. And I was staying in New York, and we had, I think, 2 days off one time. And it's a classic story because I drove down to Miami on the day off, took all my things. I had a Volkswagen bus. I took all my possessions and I put them out on the street because I didn't have anything. You know, I had a picnic table and a bed and a few other things. And most of the stuff I put on the street, it was all hand-me-down stuff that I had. And then I drove back. I drove straight down, did that, and drove straight back.
Wow.
You know, so that's like 48 hours of driving and then, you know, doing the switch over. So,
Yeah.
and then went back, and then was in New York at that time. And we were playing at that club with Phyllis Hyman. And the amazing thing about that band was when we came to New York, we had a different sound than what was happening in New York at the time. New York, it was more the funk R&B scene, and it was either the funk scene or it was the jazz scene, sort of post bebop jazz scene, or loft scene, which is a lot of free jazz. But we were playing all of it with Phyllis, and it was she's very adventurous. She improvised a lot, and with Clifford and Hiram and Billy, we were playing sort of progressive funk at that time. And at the same time, while we were playing there, a lot of people came into that club to hear us play. So Stevie Wonder came in, George Benson, George Harrison.
Wow.
The Parker Brothers, because word got out that there was this hot band in town. And so that's how I met a lot of people initially, because we were in a band that was, you know, causing some interest. And at the same time, the keyboard player, drummer, and I got called to go out and play with the Pointer Sisters. And so this was a big departure, but we wanted to make the break at that time and do something different. We felt we had sort of gone full circle in that particular band. So we did the engagement, went out on the road with the Pointer Sisters. We just did one tour, and then I came back to New York, and I was on my own. We were on our own. There was no work at that time, so I had to go out and really start meeting people and start really getting into the scene, and that's when it all started happening. And I remember very clearly, I said, well, I'm in New York. I don't have any work. I had saved a little money from working on Miami Beach. Not a lot, but enough for a couple of months. And I said, you know what? I always wanted to study with Dave Holland, so let me make it creative while I'm here, because I didn't know how long I was going to stay in New York. And so I started studying with Dave, which was great. And then things gradually progressed. I got a call from Diodato, who people know him from 2001 Space Odyssey. He did a funky version of that in the 70s.
Right, I remember,
He had great bands, and he called me up out of the blue. I think Jeff Berlin had recommended me, and he called me up and said, Mark, it's Diodato. And I said, oh, Diodato. He said, I'm doing a tour of Australia. I want to see if you want to go. And he said, I heard that you played with the Pointer Sisters. And I said, yes. He goes, great. You want to go to Australia? So I said, great. I didn't even ask how much it paid. I was just so flipped that I had a gig, you know?
Yeah.
So I went with a drummer named Nick Remo from New York, and we went to Australia for a month. We picked up the Dolly Wilson Big Band horns, and we played all over Australia and New Zealand. So that was the first gig, and then I came back to New York with him and played a film date and a couple other dates, and then I got a call to play with David Sanborn.
Right.
Because David knew that I'd been playing Diodato, because Hiram Bullock was playing. It's all networking, as you can see.
Yeah.
It's all friends and people knowing other people. So I had a I got a call from David to join the David Sanborn band. And, to me, that was a really big break, because to be in that band, you were sort of, it catapulted you to being on the New York scene as a session player and as just a name on the New York scene. So I started to do more recording sessions and get recommended for a lot of jingle, movie, and record dates in New York at that time. And so we did some touring with David, and I did a record with David, of which I wrote a song, the first song that I wrote, called Heart Lake, that I presented to him, and he wanted to record it. So interesting enough, we recorded back in Miami. So I went back to Miami to Criteria Studios, where we used to do a lot of night sessions, free time, late at night, all night sessions. And so I was back there and recorded the record with Aaron Bullock, Victor Lewis, great drummer. And let's see, Juma Santos and Rosalie De Leon was the keyboard player. So that was a great experience. And that, again, that record sort of furthered to put me on the New York scene map by having a record, being on a record with David Sanborn. It gave you a certain recognition for having done that. And so, which leads me to, I was starting to do a lot of studio work in New York and playing gigs and touring around locally with David. But then I got a call from Pat Metheny, and he said, I'm going to start a band. He had already done two records on ECM. One was Bright Size Life with Jocko and Bob Moses, and then he had done Watercolors with Eberhard Weber, Danny Gottlieb, and Lyle Mays. But he wanted to start a new band and asked if I wanted to do it. And I said, wow. Pat was relatively unknown at that time.
Right.
David Sanborn was very much known, much more so. And I really felt like I was really getting into New York. And I spoke about that with Pat, and he said, well, why don't you come up to a rehearsal up in Boston? We're going to rehearse some of the songs. And I remember taking the train from New York to Boston. I had a little practice electronic headphone set. I had my bass and practice on the train, which I like to do that. I like trains. I like traveling trains. So we went up there, we played the music, and it blew me away. It was just totally happening, and some fresh new music. And like I talked about earlier, I always wanted to be in a creative music scene. And not that David Sanborn wasn't creative, but I felt that this was really fresh new music that I wanted to be a part of. So one of the most difficult choices I've ever had to make was it's my phone.
That's all right.
Sounds like a wind chime. Was leaving David Sanborn's band and joining then the unknown Pat Metheny group and touring around in a van, playing at small little local bars, Boston, Philly, everywhere. But I did it. I made the leap. I made the plunge, the leap of faith. And it was a great move for me, because obviously that band, catapulted that whole scene and was a very successful and popular band. And we traveled about 300 days a year. Well, I was with the band for 4 years.
Right.
And the first year was in a van completely. We all took turns, usually driving. And there's a lot of great stories of drives we did. We drove across the whole United States we stopped, I think, in Denton, Texas.
Right.
Went to LA, Seattle, and then drove all the way back to the East Coast, straight.
Wow. Wow.
We hit it so hard. When you really think about 300 dates a year on the road, what that means.
Yeah, right.
It means you're constantly it. But it was great, and it was a great creative experience for me, playing with Pat and Lyle, who was such an incredible musician and great orchestrator. And of course, Danny Gottlieb, and the relationship that we have musically playing together was formed and established in that band, because we play together so much. You become so intuitively connected with the drummer and all the players.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Lyle Mays is an extraordinary musician. Absolutely a wonderful player. I mean, he's beyond
genius.
Yeah, it's beyond being a good player. It's just an extraordinary musical A genius, absolutely. I mean, the what he brought or brings to the Pat Metheny, it's just incredible what he's brought to the albums and the gigs, you know. So, okay, just
Yes.
I mean, just keep talking, Mark. It's fascinating.
Yes. So we played with that band and traveled. I would say after the first year, we started traveling. We flew some, and we had a one guy helping with the road crew, and that gradually evolved to when the White Album came out. Um, we finally had a semi truck and carried around Steinway grand piano and lights and sound, and it became a uh, real big touring act. And we toured all over the world,
Right.
Europe many times, all the countries in Europe, Japan several times,
Yeah.
and I was with that band until 1980. When Pat wanted to make a change and I wanted to make a change, and Danny and I started the band Elements, which was originally founded with Danny and myself as the leaders, co-leaders, with Clifford Carter as special guest, and the great saxophonist Bill Evans on
Right.
saxophone.
Absolutely great player. Yeah.
And we did 10 records with that. I believe 5 of them on RCA, and then we did on my own label. We've done 2 records with them as well.
Right.
And that was a real branching out opportunity for me and Danny, not only as co-leaders, but also as a composer. It really gave me a platform, something to write for. So I became very into the writing mode and writing phase of my career with that.
Right. Right.
Because we had a very specific ensemble to write for, and it allowed me to write things that would feature not only Bill and Clifford and Danny, but bass, myself. And I also branched out from there and have done a number of solo records since then,
Sure.
which is, based on many different ideas and concepts or
Yeah.
concepts for the album. Each
Yeah.
one.
So when was the last time you made an album, Mark, in your own studio there? I remember seeing you talking at a NARM show, I think, and you were saying that you wanted to do an album a year. Have you managed to put an album out a year, or are you 2 albums a year? How's that going? Are you keeping busy?
No, it's more like every 2 years. I
Yeah.
was an ambitious. I wanted to say something like that to keep me going and keeping in the mode, because once I start a project, I'm in it, and then it ends, and it's sort of a letdown. And I like to try to jump into something else right away, because
Yeah.
for me, I like to keep active. I like to keep creating and practicing and playing, and I always like to be reading a good book. I always like to be exercising. I always like to be
Yeah.
staying in, studying whatever musically, philosophically. But
Yeah.
I enjoy staying in, and my daily practice encompasses a lot of different concepts, and from technique. We can talk about that a little bit later, but
Yeah.
also studying different harmonic concepts, ways of improvising, studying modes, different ideas, and getting very inside the modes. For instance, lately I've been studying some of the modes of the great classical composer Oliver Messiaen,
Right.
some of his limited transposition modes, and fascinating, because I like to sometimes use writing and technical techniques that I wouldn't normally think of. It puts me in a different frame of mind, and it gives me restrictions or boundaries from which to extract ideas, because otherwise I feel like I'm playing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't like that. I want to play new music. I want to keep stretching the boundaries, and that is such the beauty of creative music and just the beauty of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to
Yeah.
sound too overly whatever, but is the fact that it's endless, and the beauty is that you can keep discovering things and try to be in the moment to express
I,
those,
I
either with
complete
thought,
I com I
playing.
com I completely identify with that, Mark. Like when I'm teaching, and I'm always trying to push myself to break out of to break out of boundaries and break out of repetition. And like and I kind of berate myself that I haven't got far enough out of the pentatonic boxes, you know. And just about every
Mhm.
student that comes to me, every guitar student that comes to me, they always say the same thing. I want to get out of the pentatonic boxes, you know. And I mean, what you're what you're talking about there is so far outside of the pentatonic boxes, it's unreal. But you know, music for me is definitely about the experience of life and the expression of beauty and you know, and the greater picture of the things that happen that you just can't bottle it. You know, you can't even I can't even put it into words. I can't describe it. You know, how it's just a fascinating process that never seems to stop enriching, you know, and wanting to learn and wanting to listen and tune into things. And you know, when I came to New York and I was hanging out with yourself and Carl and Richie Morales and Thierry, that was a massive challenge for me as well. You know, I felt like that really raised my game. You know, it really made me kind of like sit down and work and practice and want to be better. And honestly, I felt intimidated, you know, working with you guys. But when I came back to Europe, everybody said that my playing had improved, and it was through working with guys like yourself and connecting and not being too precious or not letting pride get in the way. To think that there are people out there who know more, who've done more, and who can help me expand and develop. You know, so I'm totally with you on that. Totally with you on that, Mark. You know.
Yes, well, it was Paul. It was great playing with you when you were spending time in the New York area because
Mm,
it's interesting. Because likewise, you inspire me because of your playing. You know, so it made
right.
me practice. You know, in a different way, which is always it's great. The
Mm,
interaction between musicians, and you know, I was so blown away by your playing and your spirit and the energy. We've had some great gigs together. I
yeah.
remember, especially
Yeah.
playing with Richie Morales and
Yeah.
Carl Latham.
Yeah.
We had some great, man, smoking some of the best moments, you know, of my playing. I mean, you know, so
Great.
and it's great to be inspired and it sometimes doesn't take. You can get inspired in different ways, but
Hmm. Hmm.
musically, you can be around someone and they can just play a certain way that you haven't heard. So that's the importance of everybody
Yeah.
getting out and
Yeah.
you know collaborating, getting together with people, and getting out of your own
Hmm.
head. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
but
Definitely.
you know when I say that I spent a lot of time trying to play new things, I've also spent thousands, tens of thousands of hours. I don't know about tens of thousands, but many hours.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Going back and learning the pentatonics, learning scales. I mean, I still practice, you know, 2 octave scales,
Yeah.
two,
Yeah.
3 octave arpeggios,
Yeah.
positions with a metronome, and you know, they're the building blocks of music. You can't,
Yeah.
you know, students that have come to me to say exactly what you said. They want to just get outside the box, learn different things, and then I'll say, well, play a 3 octave arpeggio, and
Hmm.
they can't, or 2 octave arpeggio, or play diatonic arpeggios
Hmm.
in minor arpeggios, and they can't do it. And
Yeah.
so those are all the building blocks, and that's something when I studied with Dave Holland, I really realized that the foundation, you know, you have to get the foundation before you can expand and go out. You know, you've
Hmm.
got to have the physical foundation, and especially as a bass player,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's so deep. The responsibility of bass, to
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
to lay down a foundation and being as solid as possible to be able to catapult some amazing player like you know, is something that I love. I love
Hmm.
to be down in the pit, down in the
Yeah.
pipeline
Yeah.
with a drummer just
Hmm.
laying a fat groove. You know, a lot of people know of my playing as more, you know, the melodic ethereal. I don't know what these are things that people have said to me, melodic
Hmm.
things,
Very.
but I'm only playing the groove and I'm into anything. You know,
Yeah.
the melodic part of my playing, I think, comes from having been a trumpet player,
Hmm.
and I transferred a lot of melodic ideas on trumpet because, as I said, I'd been playing trumpet professionally about 4 years, 5 years before I started playing bass,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I was playing solo trumpet in the jazz band in Miami, and I was listening to Miles Davis and transcribing all those solos. So, uh, just in this context of what we're talking about as far as expanding boundaries and ideas on instruments and how to do that, it's really a balancing act, and you have to have the right balance of getting a really strong foundation, because all the great players have studied and practiced so much. When you listen to John McLaughlin, or you listen to Segovia, speaking of guitar players, or you listen to Jaco, or you listen to Ron Carter, or you listen to Dave Holland or Scott LaFaro, they practice their asses off. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from extremely diligent hard work, and it's endless, and you have to enjoy it. It really is something that I love to practice. It's never work. Music has never worked for me unless I'm in a bad situation where the time is dragging, and not the best of rhythm sections, or something is weird. It can be tough, but I would say that's definitely the minority of the times that I've played. And like I said,
it's never ending, and one of the wonderful things that I like, take the pentatonic or you take the Dorian, which are the modes that guitar players get stuck in, and through several weeks of lessons and studying, we break out of that and we get into all kinds of things, diminished and whole tones and all kinds of things, and then you go back to the Dorian and the pentatonic, and suddenly it's brand new. The scales that we were bored of are suddenly brand new, and they sound amazing again because of the complementary support of the other modes and the other scales. It is never ending. This code, this poetry, it's fantastic.
And when you have examples from masters like John Coltrane and Miles Davis and John McLaughlin and some of the people that I mentioned, they studied those things, but they took them musically to other places. So for me, I think I've always stressed the importance for students, and I'm sure you do too, is to listen to the masters and emulate those players, because you can't just practice scales. You got to, probably one of the best things is just put on a CD. Well, there's no CDs anymore, but put on a track on YouTube. And, I wanted to go back a little bit to what you had mentioned about how players these days sort of lack that electricity of the sounding fresh or new. And I think, though, one of the good, positive aspects of what's happening with today in technology is you can find anything you want on YouTube. You can you can hear any music or any streaming. You can watch players. There's instructional things. There's anything you want. You have to know how to ask the questions. You have to be your own teacher. If you got to know. You have to put the universe together of questions that you have. Okay, I really want to be able to play over a G minor blues. So go in and find G minor blues. Do a search. I did a clinic recently, and someone asked, well, what are the best jazz standards to learn? And I said, well, have you ever heard of the Jamie Aebersold Play Along series? And they hadn't heard of that. I said, well, go online and you can find it, and it's a series where you can play along with every jazz standard that ever was.
Right.
And then find the players like Sonny Stitt or John Coltrane who recorded those standards and listen to the way they did it and try to emulate it. And I've had friends and students that say, well, gee, I'm afraid if I transcribe something and play it verbatim, then I'm just going to sound like someone else. And you'll never sound like someone else, because everybody has an individual sound. The real trick and key is to come up with your own sound. And I think once you have the building blocks, you can come up with nuance in the way that you phrase things and play in between lines that can give you your own sound, your own identity. And it's something that I've worked really hard with, especially with the Pat Metheny group of Pat is such an individual,
Yeah.
innovative sound. When he plays, you know it's Pat, right?
Yeah,
Wouldn't
that's
you
right.
say? Or a very good
Instantly,
clone.
one note, two
Right.
notes, you know it's him. Yeah.
So an interesting thing when we were with when I was with the Pat Metheny group, we were very conscious about having our own sound as a band, but also individually. Pat would invariably say, listen to your sound, listen, work on this, and I took lessons with Pat, actually,
Right. Right.
informal lessons as we're on the different ways of articulating lines. For instance, especially on fretless bass, you could take any one melody and there's thousands of ways that you can approach it from below, from above, you can bend a
Yeah.
little, you can
Yeah.
slur into it, slur out of it, slur all of it. And that's something that Pat does a lot. He does a hammer-on effect.
Yeah.
And so there's ways to practice those sort of creative ideas on the bass, just by, even with like 1, 5, rather than da da da, da da da, and backwards, da
Yeah.
da da, da da da, ba ba ba, and then connecting things. So I had a real epiphany when I started to realize if you take, like a good exercise would be take any melody and try to articulate it as many different ways as you can. Play a melody that you know and just try to play it as many ways as you can by slurring it, attacking and slurring, attacking, and you'd be surprised, how many things you can come up with. And those are the things that really give you more of an identity. That's, for me, that's what I found.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
something that I work on a lot. So interesting, but everything's available now. And I
Yeah.
think what you were referring to about everybody sort of sounds the same and it's nothing different is that it's like a tape, many generations, and they're all overlapped onto the other. So you've got Michael Brecker and Pat Metheny and
Yeah.
Giaco and all this, and people listening to all these things, and then it's what's on top of that comes out to the sound. It sounds like, wow, it sounds like Metheny, but it's like Giaco-ish, but you don't hear anybody that comes out and they're just, whoa,
Yeah.
that person,
Yeah. Yeah.
You find,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I've always thought is that when I was playing the guitar when I was like 14, 15, 16, and I would play one note, you know, and it would be like an accident. I would play one note and I would think, Jesus, that sounds great, you know, just finding a note over a blues or whatever, and really just thinking that note sounds great, and playing it over and over again and using it over and over again. And I think that's kind of the beginning of the development of an individual voice, of kind of making a mistake. I've made loads of mistakes, obviously. We all make mistakes, but you go, but it sounds great. That sound, what was that? You know, what did I do there? And that's the individual's development. I think that's kind of, and I think it really comes from playing live as well. You know, which is tough for the up and coming guys because there's so few gigs out there compared to what there was. You know, I mean, I would say
yes,
that I learned more on stage in 5 years than I would sitting in my bedroom in 10. You know, it's like you got to create in the moment, and there's no other way to do that really than on stage. You know, you can create in the
yes,
moment at home, of course, and you can play along the backing tracks, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's like the safety net. When you're on a gig, the safety net's gone. You know,
yes,
and you're gonna go straight. So you got to start playing, and that's what I think's a shame for a lot of young players is that the I'm not saying there's no gigs, but compared to what it was, it's very different to what it was. I mean, what do you think about how things are going, Mark? Do you think that the industry's dead? Do you think it's changing? Do you think it's dying? Do you think it's recovering? I can't make my mind up. What's going on with it? You know?
Well, I don't think it's dead, the industry or the scene. I think that I hear a lot of great players all over the world, young players that like what we just talked about. They have access to so much, and they
Yeah.
learn so many things. These young players sound amazing. When I was coming up, a bass player that just laid it down, played a groove,
Yeah.
was considered happening. But now everybody's has a ridiculous, amazing chops. You know, if you've been to a NAMM show
Yes.
out in California,
Yeah.
you'll know what I mean.
Yes.
I think for every instrument. So
Yeah.
I think that it's difficult. There aren't as many venues to play at, and you have to be really resourceful to get your own thing happening. And it's much harder than before, where people will be calling you. You have to call people and get out and get venues happening to play in. And I don't think there's many tours out there, or there's very few like high-end tours like Clapton and Jeff Beck, and for a bass player that to find work to do. Whereas I think there are in towns you can be resourceful and find places where you can play. It's not going to be for very much money, see, and that's the difficult thing, because it's very difficult to make a living. But I think not only have to be resourceful about getting your own gigs happening, but also into writing your own music. Try to get streaming music happening. If you can sell CDs, gigs, that's helpful. But people don't even use CDs anymore. That's sort of a past medium.
Yeah.
So, it's difficult. It's trickier. It's not as plentiful as far as the work. In New York, there's a lot of clubs to play in, but they pay $50 or nothing.
Yes.
If to play. So it's you were here.
Yeah.
Your experience.
Yeah.
So I play. I play around the New York and Boston area. I also play in Europe. I'm going next week to Austria. I play at a festival called the Outreach Festival right near Innsbruck, which is a great festival. It's a bunch of players from New York and all over Europe, and we play for 3 nights of concerts, but we rehearse for a week, and it's televised and recorded. And so I'm writing for a big band right now for that, getting ready for that. So that's been a big challenge. And
Great.
this is the 7th year that I've written for that. So, but that's the type of thing. And I tour Europe and in the States, and I do a lot of studio work in my own studio here, which is something that has been very good for me. And I'm sure you do that too, where people send you tracks to play on, or send people tracks of yours. And I find that that's what I do most of the time now, is play. And most of my income, a lot of it is from recording, and people send me tracks from all over the world actually to play bass on, and I do that.
Yeah.
I prefer playing live sessions with humans, and I like the combination of both, but I like producing as well. I enjoy a little bit of mixing. I'm not a great mixer, but I've done some. A question a while back, you asked, what's your latest record? You wanted to do an album a year. I didn't really answer what my latest CD was, but I did a record that came out last year with, it's called Dreaming Spirits.
Right.
And it's with a tabla player and myself and a guitar player named Shane Theriot, who plays with Daryl Hall. Do you know of him?
Right.
Do you know of Shane? Great player.
Yeah.
He played with Dr. John a little bit. He played with the Neville Brothers, with Aaron.
Right.
And he's from New Orleans.
Right.
Really nice player. But we did a trio record, and it's probably one of my most successful records. It's actually a trio record, but it's a duo project with Arjun and myself. Arjun Brugman is the top player, myself. And it's sort of my version of the Gil Evans Sketches of Spain album.
Right.
Conceptually, not as far as the material, but it was it's very moody, very trance-like, and it got more airplay than any other record of mine. Wow. It was a #3 jam band record in the United States, and it was #2 or 3 on New Age. It fit into the New Age category, which is whole other conversation as far as different styles of music and how things get categorized in radio airplay.
Yes, totally. Totally.
You know that. And there's a whole other side of my production company I have a record label. It's called Waveform Records. I've had it since 1993, and I put out 25 releases on that. So
Right.
I'm very involved with my own projects, releasing records on that label and promoting them. And,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
the latest one. I did a record before that. I just want to mention with Carl Latham
great.
and Vic Juris, the great Vic Juris, yes.
Well, I'm sort of there's talk of coming back to New York in October. So if I'm going to be back in town, we'll definitely get together. We'll try and find somewhere to play. I think the Fez went. Thierry was saying that the Fez in Stamford's gone. Pete's Saloon, maybe, But we'll definitely stay in touch, Mark. And
Great.
when I get some dates, I'll start, firing emails out to people, and I'll start, seeing if I can't get something together for the time that I'm there. I was kind of working on a guitar workshop at the moment in New York State, and if I'm going to be there doing that, then obviously I'm going to try and fit other things around. So I mean, wouldn't it be great to get out and do a couple more gigs again?
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
would be awesome. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
And, keep me posted with that because I love playing with you and we could, we could get some good music going.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean,
Awesome.
now I've kind of got this streaming thing happening. We could be doing live streams and all kinds of things. But I think
Yes.
maybe once I've got the dates in place, Mark, I'll get on to the Turning Point. I'll get on to Pete's Saloon. I'll rattle a few contacts and see if we can't get something happening. But Mark, it's been great talking to you. It's been very, very interesting hearing your story, and I hope that the internet has held up. We'll just have to see on a playback later on. But if there's anything else you want to add, Mark, before we wrap things up.
Oh, I just want to say thank you. Thanks for doing this interview. And
Pleasure.
it's always been great to know you and to play with you. And I can't wait to play again.
Yeah,
And,
great.
I want to thank everybody who's listening for listening. And, I hope I've given you some insight into my background and what's going on. And,
Yeah.
I always feel after we speak, I'll think of a million things that I wanted to talk about as far as what I've been up to and the
Well,
music going forward, what's coming up,
we can always do it again, Mark. We can always do it again. I mean, I'm hoping that we'll see how the upload goes afterwards. There may be some inconsistencies on the internet connection. If so, it's no problem. We can do it again, and we can go as long as we like, basically. So
Right.
brilliant. Thanks very much, everybody. I've
Yeah,
had.
Paul.
Pardon?
Oh, Paul,
Yes.
I lost. Oh, are you still there?
I hope so. Hello.
Yeah, you're
Ah,
there.
I am here. Has the microphone died?
You.
No, I'm back. Okay.
No, I just wanted to, in closing.